All set.
Hi, welcome. I'm Cynthia Curry, Director of the AIM Center, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar, Accessible Presentations, How to Design and Deliver Content for Diverse Audiences. Other AIM Center staff on this webinar include Leslie O'Callahan, our Operations Coordinator, and of course, Luis Perez, our acclaimed presenter. And I just saw that Lynn McCormack, who's another AIM Center staff person, has entered. So you have lots of AIM Center support during the webinar today. Just a few things before we get started about the Zoom environment. First, live captioning is being provided for the webinar. So to view them, click the closed caption button in your Zoom menu, and then captions will appear along the bottom of your screen. So I just want to thank our live caption provider today. It's a great service. Even if you think that you may not have a need for the captioning, we recommend that you turn the captions on because there may be some terms that are new to you, and sometimes both hearing Luis say the terms and seeing them in the caption pod can be really helpful to learning and retaining some of this information. We want to make sure that you contribute to the conversation. Your microphones are muted, but we'd love to know your thoughts and questions throughout the presentation. So please use the chat to do this. If your chat box is not already visible, and we know that it is to most of you, if not all, because we've had some active participation there, you click the chat panel button, and above the field where you enter your text, make sure that you see all panelists and attendees listed. If you don't, please make sure you select that if all you see is all panelists, because I want to make sure that everybody's thoughts, ideas, and questions are visible to everybody in the room. And of course, if you're Twitter, make sure that when you are tweeting that you include our hashtag #AimForAll. And then finally, for materials, the materials for this webinar are available on our website. So I think Leslie has been dropping that link in the chat. You'll definitely want to use those because Luis has some really important materials that go along with this webinar. It's not just a sit and get. There are some interactive materials as well that you can be following along during the webinar, as well as take away with you for later use. The webinar is being recorded, it will be archived, and that should be available within a week or so. It takes a little time because we send out all of our webinars for captioning. And then a couple of things that we want to inform you about. We have some additional webinars coming up in September, inclusive PDFs by design. That is September 18th at 2, and Luis is going to be delivering that. And then Lynn McCormack is going to be delivering Is Your State, District, or School Website Accessible? So be sure to mark those dates, September 18th and September 25th. They're both at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we also are offering an online learning series that's available through our website. The next module, Module 2, starts on August 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can get information about our online module series by going to our website. When you go to our website, you can just simply in the search field, so the easiest way to do this because our search engine is so robust at the AIM Center. If you go to aim.cas.org, aem.cas.org, go to the search field and just search for online modules. You'll be taken to information about that series and how to register. And if you have any questions, you can just reach out to us, and our contact information will be included in Luis's presentation. So thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to pass this right over to Luis.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for taking care of those housekeeping details. Welcome, everybody, to the webinar part of this presentation, Creating Accessible Presentations. That's a little bit meta, right? I'm doing a presentation on presentations. I'm Luis Perez. I'm a Technical Assistant Specialist at the National AIM Center. And I'm really excited to share this content with you today. All right, so in good UDL fashion, I want to begin by having you set a goal for this session. So what is it that brought you to this session today? And this is, I have a second motive for this, is to make sure that you can find the chat. So in the chat area, go ahead and just let us know real quick, what is your goal? What do you hope to get out of this session? I'll go ahead and just take a look in the chat. Don't be shy. This is a really friendly, supportive crowd. All right, to enhance my presentations, looking to steal new ideas. I like that. Great artists steal, right? Excellent. Keep coming, keep sharing. This is great. Great. So it looks like we're all on the same page. We want to talk about accessibility and making sure that our presentations work for the widest audience, the widest, most variable audience. Great. Excellent. So I want you to keep that goal in mind and then go back to it at the end. And if there's anything we can do at the end of this webinar to make sure that you meet that goal, just let us know. All right. So I want to start with a question here. I want you to think, what does a pitcher of water have to do with creating an accessible presentation? So give me your best thoughts on this. What do you think a pitcher of water has to do with creating an accessible presentation? And don't worry, it's not multiple choice. There's no poll or anything like that. This is just your initial thoughts, and we'll find this out throughout the webinar anyway. Communicating ideas. I love that. I love that idea. Lots of great ideas coming through. Too many for me to keep up with. So if you see any, Cynthia, that kind of resonate with you, let me know.
They are coming by really fast. We have some really engaged, active participants, but you know what? I'm going to be, some of my input from looking at the chat may be a little bit delayed during this webinar, but I'm going to be following and let you know what strikes me.
Well, Francesca says refreshing to those that drink and attend. So that is going to be my goal. Hopefully this presentation will be refreshing and it will leave you with some great ideas. And just like somebody said, I'm going to fill you with some ideas about accessible presentations. So just stay tuned and we'll come back to this idea of the pitcher of water.
Oh, I like this one, Luis. Information needs to flow freely.
Absolutely. So that's why we do presentations, right? Because we want to bring about some change. And so we need that information to get out there into the world and bring about change. And part of that is communicating the message effectively. So our session today is really going to focus on accessibility for presentations. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't share with you some resources that have to do with the design of presentations. So there's a few books here that I want to recommend. These are some of the books that have really changed my life as a presenter. Probably the one that I would start with is the Presentation Zen by Garb Reynolds. And that completely changed my life, reading that book. It really changed the way that I present in a much more simple, but very rich way with lots of visuals. So Garb Reynolds, by the way, in your handout, I saved you a little bit of money because a few years ago, Garb Reynolds did a presentation at Google where he basically distills the key ideas from his book. And so in your handout, you will find a link to that presentation. You can still buy the book and have it as a resource, but that will save you a few bucks. And then Nancy Duarte's Resonate, How to Present Visual Stories That Transform Audiences. A great book. She went back and she analyzed some of the best presentations in history. Think the unveiling of the iPhone by Steve Jobs, the Gettysburg Address, the I Have a Dream speech. And she goes through and analyzes those speeches that have changed the world. And she looks at what is the common structure in those speeches, in those presentations. And so there's lots of insight there for you to glean from that book. And then finally, Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. And that's more about the message. How do you convey a message so that it is sticky? So it's a message that's memorable and that people will take with them and will continue to change the world years after they watch a presentation or after they go to an event that you put on. So those are just 3 books to get you started because I really believe there is a correlation between a well-designed presentation and accessibility. So one of the changes that Presentation Zen brought about for me was just removing a lot of the text from my slides. And so when you think about accessibility, that's something that sometimes we don't consider. How much text is on a slide? And is that going to put somebody who struggles to read that text at a disadvantage in terms of being able to participate? So I really believe that there's a correlation there between the design of the presentations and accessibility. Another insight from Gar Reynolds' book that really, again, had a big impact on me is I always thought that I had to get everything that I was going through my mind on that slide. And so I ended up basically what Gar calls sliduments. How many of you have created a slidument? Go ahead and share in the chat. Or you can say I to yourself silently, and I'll be the first one. I, most of us have created a slidument. So basically that's where we take all of the text that would normally go in a document and we try to fit it into a slide. So one of the first steps that Gar Reynolds recommends is taking that text and dropping it into your notes area, and then building a slide that is much more visual, much simpler, and that really takes a lot of that noise and gives you a lot higher signal to noise ratio. And so one of the first steps that I always do is kind of separate those two things. That the slide deck is what I'm going to present, and the handout is the takeaway. These are the resources that I want you to refer to once we've left our time together, right? Once the webinar is over, once the presentation's over. Now, I want to emphasize both of them need to be accessible, and both of them need to follow best practices. So we're going to focus mostly on the slide deck in this presentation, but at the end, I have some tips for the handout as well. And a lot of this kind of cuts across all documents, whether they're a presentation or just a regular document. All right, so why accessibility? And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I really want to get to some of the how-to. But this article that Cynthia shared with me a while back really does a great job of capturing this. This is by, is it Angela Blackwell? I always forget the first name.
I believe so. I'm going, just in case Leslie doesn't have the link, I'm happy to go find it.
It's in your handout as well. So Angela Blackwell from very recently, she came up with this idea of the curb cut effect. And it really captures that idea of these, all these innovations that were originally started for the benefit of people with disabilities, and then went on to have a greater impact in society. So an example is the curb cut, right? It was developed for people in wheelchairs, but it went on to benefit, you know, parents pushing strollers, UPS delivery people, skateboarders, bicyclists, they all benefit from that. And so here are just a few other examples. Some of these you probably haven't considered, like bike lanes. It turns out that neighborhoods where there's bike lanes tend to be safer for everybody, for pedestrians. There are fewer accidents with pedestrians being run over. The smoking ban on airlines, that was flight attendants that, you know, were just basically fed up with being exposed to so much smoke on those flights. Well, now we all enjoy a much cleaner experience. Well, okay, relatively cleaner experience when we fly. And then there's other examples like affirmative action, seatbelts, right? Originally, kids were the main beneficiaries, but now how many lives have been saved for that? So when we think about the digital environment, I can think of one really great example, captioning. So in the chat room, who do you think is one of the biggest users of captions? Aside from people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So somebody said seniors, English language learners, that's a really good one. Students with learning disabilities, absolutely. Non-native English speakers. When there's kids playing, so they're being really loud, right? Sports bars, restaurants, so anywhere where the environment is really the cause of, we could put it another way. You could say that you're temporarily disabled, right? The environment puts you at a disadvantage. Nobody's mentioned the one that I was thinking of. Significant others who want to go to sleep at a different time. Maybe you want to stay up and you want to watch SportsCenter, but your significant other has to get up early the next morning. Well, they can turn on the captions. So these are all great examples of that concept of universal design, right? What is essential for some almost always benefits us all. Now, we look at accessibility from a sort of a unique perspective because the AIM Center is based at CAST. And so we look at accessibility really within the context of the neuroscience of learning, and we take a UDL perspective to it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in UDL, but I want to refer you to this great resource from CAST, the UDL guidelines. And you'll find those at udlguidelines.cast.org. We're going to be focusing quite a bit on the principles of representation and action and expression in this webinar. So that's the what of learning, right? The content of your presentations, and the how of learning, how you engage with your participants and how they're able to interact with the content. But I do want to take a second and focus on the why of learning as well, that engagement concept. So one of the ways that we can add to engagement in our presentations is to really use the power of story. Because stories have a familiar structure, right? We've grown up with them. We've heard stories from the time that we're little. And so it's a really sort of familiar format for us. Also with stories, we're able to make a connection, right? An emotional connection. And that in turn makes the information more memorable. In fact, the use of story is one of the concepts in Made to Stick, the book that I mentioned at the beginning from the Heath brothers. So I want to hear from you. What is your presenter's journey? So are you an experienced presenter? Have you been presenting for years? If so, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you in the middle of a presentation? And if you're not an expert presenter, where are you in that journey?
Or what is your worst fear?
What is your worst fear? Absolutely. So
what's holding you back from presenting? If that's
a fire alarm. So Kelly right away said a fire alarm. So Kelly, how did you deal with that? Go ahead and share what happened. What was the aftermath? A mouse in the ceiling during a presentation.
It's a little distracting.
So I'm sure everybody was focusing on that. Someone who's fairly new, running staff development. And that's, again, we may not be presenting as salespeople, but every day we go into the classroom, we are doing a sales job, right? We are selling learning. And a lot of times that involves presenting and communicating ideas. Well, I will, go ahead.
A moth flew into my hair during a presentation and I screamed. Well, I think that anybody in that position would. And then we have some weather related issues, of course. Tornado, and I know power outages result from weather-related incidents. That has happened to me.
I will tell you real quick, so I can move along here. My worst, well, I wouldn't say my worst, but my most interesting presentation experience. I was presenting at our statewide conference here when we had a power outage and the whole building went dark. So we had no projector, no computers. And so that's when a good story comes in handy as well. So if you go back and you watch some of one of Steve Jobs' presentation, the launch of the iPhone, there was one of the demos that failed. And when that happened, what he did is he broke into a story about how they started Apple and the good old days hanging out with Steve Wozniak and so on. And that was one of the most memorable moments from that presentation. So again, have a story in your back pocket. You never know when you're going to need it. All right, other ways that you can increase engagement, embed some reflection, some discussion prompts. Our working memory is kind of limited, and every once in a while it needs a break. So every 10 minutes or so, or 15 minutes, have a cognitive break where there's a prompt for people to reflect, or there's a switch of presentation format. So that's another thing you can do. You can put in a video, you can do a demo. Just that short break kind of gives the brain a chance to refresh and tackle the next piece of content with much more vigor. All right, so are there any other tips that you would like to share with the rest of the room before we get into our best practices here? So again, I wanted to spend a little bit of time because I truly believe that if you design a really good presentation, you're kind of some of the way there. in terms of creating an experience that everybody can benefit from. These best practices will take you the rest of the way.
Louis, some of these are really funny. You're going to have to come back. They're just great. We don't have time to go through all of them, but everybody in the room who's reading them is very amused. So good question. Excellent question for this webinar.
That is great. We always want to make sure we have a little bit of fun as well. That's part of a good presentation as well.
That's right.
All right, so some best practices. Let's get into some of these tips. But before I do that, I want to share a quote that my friend and cast colleague, Mindy Johnson, shared with me, and that has really stayed with me and really resonates. And in everything that I do, I try to do the best that I can until I know better. And then when I know better, I do better. So this is some advice, some wise advice from our poet laureate, Maya Angelou. So I want to leave that quote with you. So as we go through these tips, if you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed, I want you to go back to that quote, that you're going to do the best that you can until you know better, right? And then when you know better, you will do better. Is that a deal, everybody? All right. Okay, so here is where that pitcher of water and that glass finally comes in. You're probably like, Luis, you left us hanging. No, 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 I did not leave you hanging. So pour, right? Pour is a way that we can summarize the web accessibility, content accessibility guidelines. If you look at those guidelines, these are the standards for making content accessible, including websites, presentations, documents, PDFs. They can be a little bit overwhelming at first. But what if we took it and we sort of compressed it a little bit into 4 big principles? And you can think of these as like the big rocks that we're then going to fill in the sand around, right? So the sand is going to go into these big containers. So basically what we try to do with these 4 principles, they stand for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And when you put them together, they spell out pour. So I want you to remember pouring in the accessibility. So that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of this webinar. We're going to pour in the accessibility into our slides. All right, so the first principle here, the P in pour, is for perceivable. So we want to make sure that everyone can see and hear our content. And in some cases, even feel it, because some people may be accessing the content using a Braille display. So we want to make sure that our content is available to the senses, right? And there's a few things we can do for that. We can add alternative text to our images so that somebody who can't see the image gets a text explanation of that concept or idea that the image represents. We want to make sure our videos are captioned or that we provide a transcript. So again, that's that universal idea, universal design idea. It's not just for people with hearing challenges. It's for everybody who can benefit from having another representation. And then we want to make sure that there's sufficient color contrast. And this is probably the one that gets overlooked the most. And it's the one that I most often see in need of some help when I look at a lot of presentations. So let's take a look at the details now. So in PowerPoint, and I'm going to be running PowerPoint on my Mac, PowerPoint 2016. It's really easy to do this. Once you've inserted the image into your slides, you can right-click on it. You can choose Format Picture. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to see a series of panes under Format Picture. And you're going to find the one that says Layout and Properties. And then you're going to open up where it says Alt Text. And that's where you're going to put in your description. Now, let me explain a little tip here. Let me go back here, actually. You'll notice that there's a title field and a description field. So in theory, you would put a simple description in the title field and a more extensive one in the description field. In theory. The problem is most screen readers just read the 2 together. And so that kind of defeats the purpose of having separate fields. Also, when you export your PowerPoint into another format, like say PDF, only the description field transfers as the alternative text. So as a best practice, and this is also something that Microsoft recommends if you're going to transfer your presentation to another format, make sure that you're using the description field. So that will transfer across formats. And I just got into the habit. I don't even remember that the title field is there. I just instinctually go for the description field. All right, so let's see how we do this. Here we have an image. I'm going to exit out of my presentation. And right in my presentation, I'm going to select the image. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to choose Format Picture. And then again, that's going to open up a pane in this version of PowerPoint that I'm working with. Over on the right side, I'm going to find my different options at the top. And the third option from the left is going to be Layout or Size and Properties. If you select that option, then you're going to see a series of different items. The last one is all text. And then you're going to find description. And let's see if I can type while I'm doing a webinar live.
It's coming through.
And that's it. So right there, we've added a description. Now this image is much more accessible. So let me go back to my slides now. And I want to show you that if you're running the latest version of Microsoft Office, Office 365, there's actually an even easier way to do this. When you right-click an image, there's actually an option that says Edit All Text. And so if you select that option, it will take you right to a field where you can enter your alt text. So alt text is that, again, description of the image. What's the main idea that's conveyed by that image? What's the concept? Or if it's an interactive image, what is its function? When you click on it, where does it take you? What does it do? So in here, this is what's really cool, has me really excited about the potential of artificial intelligence. In Office 365, if you have one of the later versions, you can actually click a button that says generate a description for me. And that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence, and it tries to generate an automatic description for you. Then the other option that's brand new in Office 365 is you can also mark an image as decorative. So if the image doesn't really add to understanding, it may be just there as a layout or just to make it more visually appealing in your slide, then you can come in here and you can mark it as decorative. That's an option that we haven't had before. And what's nice on the next slide, it shows you what it did for this image. A group of people sitting at a table looking at a computer. That part is covered up, so I think it says looking at a computer. And it also gives you an indication that it was generated with very high confidence. So the AI tries to kind of give you an indication, oh, maybe this is something you want to check a little bit more closely. So this is really exciting. It's just one example of how artificial intelligence can help with accessibility. Now, if you're using something different in Office 365 or Office 2016, there are also ways to add the alt text. So don't worry, I didn't leave you out. In Google Slides, again, you can right-click the image. You can choose alt text. There's also a keyboard shortcut, Command Option Y, or probably Control Alt Y if you're on Windows. And then, again, you can add the alternative text into the description field. Just like with PowerPoint, there is a title field, but I generally ignore that because a lot of times I'm going to be transferring my presentation into another format. And I want to make sure that that transfers over. If you're in Keynote on the Mac, if you're an Apple, a Mac user, the same thing. You can select the image, go into the toolbar, choose Format, then go into the image pane, and all the way at the bottom, Apple doesn't call it alt text. They call it description. It's an accessibility description. Once again, you can add that description there. So we've talked about how to do it, but I haven't told you what makes quality image descriptions. So I'm going to use the old presenter's trick. it's beyond the scope of this presentation. What that means is we just don't have time to go over this content, but I want to make sure that you have some resources to learn more. WebAIM has a great tutorial, has lots of examples. You can go through that tutorial and you can learn about different uses of alt text. And then the Diagram Center, if you have more complex images, this is especially the case when you're working with STEM content, they have some excellent guidelines that will help you create those descriptions, which will probably involve a much longer description with much more detail. And then something that I've started using, the W3C, which is the body that creates the accessibility standards, has an alt decision tree. And so it gives you a series of scenarios of different images and some decision-making points that you can consider when adding alternative text. So let me pause here, give you a little cognitive break. Was there anything that was not clear about alt text, image descriptions? Go ahead and let us know in the chat.
There is a technical question that came up a couple of minutes ago, Luis, and this is a very common question. If the PowerPoint gets saved as a PDF, does the alt text still show up?
It will transfer over, but again, you want to make sure you put it in the description field, because when you export it with Adobe Acrobat, there's a plugin for Microsoft Office that allows you to export out of Office programs into PDF format. It will transfer over and become the alternative text. There's another question here. Does the description appear for everyone or only for those using screen readers? That's a really good question. So alternative text is intended for people who are blind and who are accessing the content with a screen reader. So again, taking more of a UDL perspective, always consider, can the image be described in the surrounding text? Or can I add a caption underneath it? Can I add some text? Because in that situation, it will be available to everybody. So that's a complex question. It really depends in the context that you're using that image. But again, that's an excellent question. Thanks for bringing that up.
And Amy asks, how would you treat presentational images? And I think this probably refers to maybe decorative images or images that really aren't conveying important content.
Absolutely.
How do you handle those, Luis?
So in the newer versions of Microsoft Word, you can mark them up as decorative images. And when you export into another format, that's going to be marked up as it has null alt text. So there's still an alt attribute in there. It's just basically telling the screen reader, ignore this. It doesn't really contribute to the content. It's just there for decoration. Now, if you don't have that option, one of the things you can do is you can go into your slide masters. And as long as you don't make the content into a placeholder, then it will be ignored by screen readers. So that's another option, is to work with your slide masters. That's going to be a little bit more advanced. I'm not going to have time to go into that, but if you do a search on the Microsoft website, they do have some guidance on how to work with masters.
Claire has a question that's beyond the scope of today as well, but that is, how would you write alt text for a graph or a chart?
So think about what's the information in the graph or chart. And in a lot of these programs, they start out as a table. So can you present the information as a table as well? And if it's, it could be that you add a link to that table in the back of your presentation, or you could put that table into a web page and link to it as well. But make sure that you link to it as close as possible to where the original chart or table is. But that's one way that you can go with that.
And Benetech has some, the Diagram Center, which is currently displayed on your slide. They have excellent guidance on how to create alt text for graphs, charts, a lot of science-heavy types of images.
Exactly.
And graphics. So that's a good resource if you're going down the road of things scientific and mathematical.
Yep. So I will come back to see if we can answer some of these questions at the end, but I'm going to move on in the interest of time. Captions, something really exciting. In the latest versions of PowerPoint, you can now very easily add captions to your videos. It used to be a lot harder. So now you can select the video, you can go into the playback tab, there's an option there for inserting the captions. Now, to be clear, you still have to create a caption file. And in the handout, I've shared with you a piece of software that you can use. It's available for free, and it's from the National Center on Accessible Media. It's called Cadet. The caption and describe something, Cadet.
Oh, captioning and description editing technology or something like that.
There you go.
The important words are the C is for captioning, the D is for description. Those are the important.
Right. So this is fairly easy to learn software, and it allows you to create a file in a format called WebVTT, and PowerPoint can accept that file and then basically display the captions when you play that video. If you have an older version of PowerPoint, then there's also a plugin that's still available out there called the Stamp plugin. And since I did so well with Cadet, I'm not even going to try to tell you what Stamp stands for. But just know that there are ways to make your videos that you add to your PowerPoints accessible. So if you don't see, just so you know, if you don't see that option, it may be that your PowerPoint hasn't been updated to one of the latest versions. Microsoft now kind of has a rolling update process where as features are ready, you kind of, depending on what version you have, you may see them show up. And then, like I said, this is one that's overlooked a lot, but it's really important, and it has to do with contrast, making sure that, the text and the background, there's sufficient contrast between the two, so that everybody can see that content. So you can see on the first example here, not enough contrast because I have white text on a yellow background. So they're very close, in terms of how we perceive them. And then on the second example, we definitely have enough contrast, black text on a yellow background. I share with you in the handout a couple of tools that I use. My favorite by far is the Color Contrast Analyzer from the Perceivable group. What I like about it is that it has a built-in color picker. And so I can open up this tool on the side, and as I'm working with a presentation or any other piece of content, I can be continuously checking for contrast. And it will show you whether it passes or fail, not just for normal size text, but also for large text. And it'll tell you if it passes at the different compliance levels. So this is a great tool to have in your back pocket. All right, let's take a deep breath. The P in Perceivable, we got through that, right? So now we're going to the O. The O is for Operable, and just a few things you can do. And I'm going to do a demo in just a second. So making sure that you have unique slide titles. When you think of a different type of document, a Word document, we can break up those documents using headings. And those headings not only serve a cognitive function, right? They chunk the information so it's easier to perceive it or easier to understand it, but they also serve a navigation function. Most screen readers have a keyboard shortcut or a gesture that you can perform that allows you to skip around in a document using the headings. Well, in a PowerPoint presentation, the slide titles can perform a similar function. They're basically hooks that assistive technology can use to help people navigate your presentation more efficiently. And so we can make sure, one of the things we want to make sure is that those slide titles are unique. And then we also want to make sure that the hyperlinks we use in our presentations are descriptive as well. Because once again, most screen reader users will press a keyboard shortcut and they'll get a list of links. And if those links don't make sense out of context when they're shown on a list, then it's going to be really difficult to determine which is the link that I want to follow. And then the final thing is checking the reading order to make sure that if someone's using a screen reader, it's going to go through the presentation in the same order that we would look at that slide. All right, so unique slide titles. There is actually something called the outline view. And that's where you will see all of the slide titles, and they'll be shown with bold text to the right of the little square that represents the current slide that you're on. So you can get to the outline view through the menus. You can go to View and then choose Outline View, or you can use a keyboard shortcut. Either way, you're going into a view where you can see all of the slides at once, and it shows you the slide titles. So again, emphasizing that universal design principle, this is not only for improved navigation for screen reader users, but it also gives somebody who just wants to get an overview of the main ideas of the presentation. It gives them an outline. And so that could be an aid to understanding as well, because you can use that outline to kind of build a map of what the presentation is all about. And then you can fill in the details by examining the individual slides. So how do you do this? Again, I'm going to exit out of my presentation. And I'm going to go into the view menu once my beach ball comes down there. And then under view, I'm going to choose outline view. There are my slides. And you can see that slide number 36 doesn't have a slide title. So what I want to do here is put in that text. Not styles. And you can see how it's showing up in the slide right away. So it gives you an idea of what that's going to look like using this layout that I'm using here. And then when you're done, you can press the keyboard shortcut again, or just choose normal. And then that will take you back to your normal view for your slides. So really simple, but it's something that can make navigation that much better for people who are using screen readers. Let's go back over here to our presentation. Now we have that unique title there. With hyperlinks, so here I have a couple of examples. Again, a lot of screen reader users will press a keyboard shortcut to get a list of those links. So this kind of simulates that. You can see that there's two links here, and they both say, click here. Or you may have seen variations of this. Learn more is one of my favorites. Learn more about what? So click here, learn more, or just here sometimes. Or I've seen this in journalism quite a bit. We've mentioned this story here and here. Well, great. Thanks a lot for that helpful hyperlink. So how can we make this better? Well, let's try that again with a more descriptive link. Now we've actually selected some text and made that descriptive text the hyperlink. So here I can tell, well, I want to go to the CAST website, then I can select that option. Or I want to go to our favorite destination, the AIM Center. Well, I can select that option. And so if I were to remove all of this text above it, and I just had this as a list, it would still make sense. It would still allow me to make a good decision about which link is the one that I want to go to. And then this is one of my favorite sayings: make sure you don't have any naked hyperlinks. Make sure you put some clothes on your URLs. The reason for that is when a screen reader comes upon a URL, it may read the first part of that URL just fine. So for instance, www.microsoft.com will be fine. But after that, all bets are off, because as the web has become bigger and there's more pages, we often end up with things like this. This is a long URL, and I have an audio file here, so you all have the pleasure of listening to it. So let's see if this works with the Zoom. Did that work?
Nope, no audio came through, Luis.
Oh.
I was wondering if there might be a delay. But
no, sometimes it's because I have headphones on. That's why. In any case, we'll pretend that worked. But you would hear right after the docs.google.com, it basically, actually right after document, because it recognizes that that's a word. But after that, everything is spoken out loud, one letter or character at a time. So that can be really confusing when you have to sit there and listen to a long URL. So again, much better to put some clothes on that URL. Select some text that's descriptive and unique, and then make that the hyperlink. And that's really going to help out those that are navigating using assistive technology.
So Luz, a couple of questions have come through.
Yep.
If you are prepared to take a quick break.
Let me do this one slide, and
Sure.
then I'll come back to questions.
Sounds good.
So related to making your presentation work for assistive technology is the reading order. And this can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to exit out of the presentation in a second and show you how to address that. So first, let me show you the steps. On the Home tab, and so that's your ribbon, right? In PowerPoint, you're going to choose Home and then Arrange. And there's a little pull-down menu right next to Arrange. You're going to choose Selection Pane from there. So here's what the tricky part is. It's not really all that intuitive. You probably think that the bottom option is going to be the last one that gets read. So it starts from top to bottom. But no, it actually starts from the bottom. So the option that's all the way at the bottom, that's going to be read first. And then it's going to go in order all the way to the one that's at the top. So let's demonstrate this so it makes a little bit more sense to you. I'm going to exit my presentation. And I've actually on purpose messed up the reading order on my previous slide here. And so that I can show you that. So first, let me close out one of these panes here. All right, so I'm in the Home tab. There we go. And then over on the right side, I'm going to find the Arrange option. And I'm going to choose the arrow on that icon or that button. It's going to bring up a menu. And then I'm going to open up the selection pane. And with these panes, like when you're working with alternative text or you're working with slide order, you can leave these panes open. And you can go from one slide to the next. And then that way you don't have to repeat these steps. So in here, as I select each of these options in the selection pane, you will see that there is a box around the currently selected item. And so I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard or the mouse, and I can move through and get a sense of what that order is like. The other thing I could do is just place the cursor anywhere on my slide without anything selected and just press the tab key a few times. And you can see this doesn't make any sense. We have the slide title last. Well, if you're a screen reader user, that's one of the first things you want to hear because that lets you know I'm on the right slide that I want to explore in more detail. So you can see here in the selection pane that the title is actually all the way at the top. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure that it's all the way at the bottom because again, the order is from bottom to top. So what I can do is really simple, just drag it down. And now my title is one of the first things that's going to be read out loud. I also, sometimes, this is just a personal preference, I will often have the slide title come earlier as well. So now I know I'm on slide 15, the title is, check the reading order, and then the other two items there are just fine. I get the text box, and then I get the image with this description. So I could repeat this for any other slides where I want to fix the reading order. All right, so now let's pause here and see if there are a couple of questions that I can answer.
So Robin is asking, will the presentation provide tips for accessibility in in-person meetings? And so I asked for a little bit more information, and Robin added presentation tips for when you are giving a presentation face-to-face in a meeting.
I have a couple of tips for that, but this is really more specific to a presentation that you're going to share or that you're going to deliver like this, like we are doing today in a webinar kind of scenario. But the W3C also has an entire web page dedicated to accessible meetings. So not just presentations, but meetings in general and events. So that includes information like before the event, things to think about, the facilities, how you invite people to the event. So that's something that's beyond the scope of this webinar. But I do want to mention just a couple of tips. In fact, they're right here. So understandable. That's again the U in poor. And we want to make sure that the content is understandable to everyone. So there's a number of ways we can do that. The first one is just having a consistent look and feel to your presentation. And using themes can help out with that. So basically, this presentation is made up of just a few slide types. And so you can get a sense of when I'm switching to another topic just by the way, the layout of the slides and how they're put together. So this kind of gets into when you're presenting, using plain language. So avoiding a lot of jargon, or if you are going to use jargon, maybe having space or time to define those key terms, if possible. And then one of my favorites is there's this article that I've included in your handout, this, that, and there. And this is something that I've seen a lot. In fact, I do it sometimes because, you know, if I'm rushed or something like that, but it's important to pay attention to it. A lot of times we'll say New Zealand is here while pointing to a map. Or while you're watching a presentation, like a how-to video, they'll say, and I clicked here, and then this happened. So what we want to make sure is we're using descriptive language. So when I was going through some of my steps, you notice that I said the third pane from the left, and I described the label that it had or the name that it had. So here are just a couple of examples of that. New Zealand's in the South Pacific to the east of Australia. The temperature went up by 5 degrees instead of saying it went by this many degrees. Because imagine that somebody is listening to this webinar in the car. So that's one way to think about it, is imagine that the person can't see the presentation, because that's what happens a lot of times these days. People are on the go and they may be, you know, they may be listening to it or they may be accessing it as a webinar. All right, so we're almost there. The U in poor, or the R, sorry, stands for robust. And it's just basically, as you're working, I would say wait until the end, but I don't do that. As a best practice, as I'm working on my slides, I take a break every once in a while and I run an accessibility check just to kind of get a sense of where I am, get a pulse check, if you will. And this is really easy to do. I will eat my own food. I'm going to do it on this presentation, even though it has some errors on purpose, but I think I just want to show you how to do it. So if you go to the review tab in the ribbon and choose check accessibility, and it will bring up a pane, an accessibility checker pane, and it will give you, for instance, where you're missing alternative text. And you can click on that option. It'll take you right to the slide. And it'll even select the item that's missing the alternative text. And then at the bottom, it gives you an explanation why this is important, and then the steps to fix it. So how cool is that? You have your own tutorial built into PowerPoint. Maybe you didn't even know it was in there, but you have your own accessibility assistant with you. And so some of these are going to show up as errors. Others are shown as warnings. So this is where the checker wasn't quite sure. So you can see some of these make sense, but like this one doesn't, because I have white text on a dark background. So it's, I know I've checked it. I know it has high contrast, but it's good that it's looking out for me and kind of guiding me towards some of these issues. And then some of them are tips. So these are just some things you want to check, or maybe the checker just couldn't get a definitive answer. So it tells me here, for instance, I have a duplicate slide title. And so let's take a look. Yeah, well, that's because I did that on purpose. So now let me fix that. I'll go ahead and make sure that this is unique with one simple change. And you'll notice that this is going to be reflected in the accessibility checker as well. And some things you just have to check manually sometimes, like the reading order is one. Technology is just not quite that powerful yet. So that's something that you probably will have to check manually. But again, think of it as like your spell checker for accessibility. In fact, in recent versions of PowerPoint, guess where it is? Right next to spelling. So just think about it that way. As you work, just like you check your spelling, make sure you go in and you do an accessibility check. All right, how much time do I have?
You have 6 minutes, Luis, till the top of the hour.
Perfect. we're almost to the end here, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So we're making good pace here. So again, pour, I'm just providing that as sort of a mnemonic, a way to remember these big principles. We want to make sure we make the content perceivable. We make it operable so people can navigate it easily without a lot of effort in a way that's logical, that's predictable, that makes sense. We want to make sure that the language is appropriate for our audience, that we're using plain language and presenting in a way that's descriptive. And then finally, we want to check our work as we go along. So we want to make sure we use that accessibility checker to make sure the presentation is robust. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's two parts of presentation. There's the slide deck, there's the handouts. A lot of these principles may be executed a little bit differently, but they still apply. So instead of having descriptive slide titles, we're going to have descriptive headings in our document that we share as a handout. They serve the same purpose, right? They allow a screen reader user to navigate the document, and they also split the content up into more manageable chunks of information. The same idea that holds for hyperlinks, making sure that they're descriptive, that's going to be the same concept that we want to apply to our handout when we create links to resources that we want to share as part of the handout. And if we have any images, we want to make sure that we include alternative text in those images. So a lot of these concepts translate across document types, whether you're working in a handout or you're creating the slide deck, or it could be a flyer that you're using to promote the presentation and that you're going to post online. Oh, but there's one more thing. Always like to have one more thing. And I have to credit Dave, who is in the chat, because he reminded me about this tool that I had explored a while back, but it had actually improved quite a bit over the years. So I was happy to check this out again. This is something called Sway from Microsoft, and it's related to PowerPoint, but it does a different job with presentations. It makes them more web-friendly, mobile-friendly, and then also more interactive in the sense that you can have animation, a lot of animation. I mean, you can do that in PowerPoint as well, but it's just presented in a different way. And you can have embedded video, embedded audio files. So it's a really nice way. One way to use it is to create a digital portfolio, for example. So if you have a lot of work you've done with video, this is a great way to showcase it. And what's nice about Sway is that it too has an accessibility checker built into it. So it allows you to review your images for alternative text. It allows you to review your hyperlinks to make sure that they are descriptive. Now, one thing to note about Sway is that a lot of the accessibility work is done through a special accessibility view. And so a lot of people may not know that when they first visit your Sway. I'm going to make that into a verb, to sway. So when somebody accesses your Sway, they may not know how to access that view. So probably one of the first slides, you want to include that information, that there is an accessibility view and how to access it. Similar to what we did with this webinar, where we showed you, well, this is where the chat is. Here's how you access the captions. Just provide a little bit of guidance to people who are maybe new to this format. Okay, so I'm going to show you a Sway. Let's go Sway a little bit, shall we? I'm going to exit out of my presentation and bring over my slides here. And I'm going to refresh because apparently I was on there for too long. So basically with Sway, I'm going to use, I can use the navigation in the lower right-hand corner, or I can just use my arrow keys. So you can see it adds this animation. I can have an audio file, and check this out. I can put some text right underneath it. So you get that alternative text right underneath the audio file. I know you can't hear that, so I'm not going to play all of it, but you can see the text version under there. I can continue here. It brings in this nice image of me. And then everything is interactive, so all the hyperlinks and everything. And then some nice full images, and you can see the captions that you can add at the bottom of the image. Here's one of those videos that I've shared with you. So again, I could play this right inside of the Sway with captioning support as well. So that's just to give you a sense of how this works. I'm going to exit out of it, and then I'm going to show you the accessibility view. So if I go to my options menu here, and I choose accessibility view, it basically presents a more linear version of the content. And so now I can scroll up and down, or I can also use the tab key on my keyboard, and I can navigate using the keyboard. So that is Sway. And again, it's just a different way to present information. It may work a little bit better if what you're trying to present is more of a standalone presentation, where you want people to interact with videos, audio files, and the like. And one way that I want to use it for myself is as a digital portfolio to highlight some of the videos and things that I create. All right, let me see if I can find my presentation. I have a few windows open here in case you were wondering. Okay, so resources. Of course, you have your handout. Everything that I've mentioned is linked on your handout. Also, on our AIM website, AIM Center website, we have a section called Designing for Accessibility with, say it with me, POUR, P-O-U-R. And so those are some tutorials and some resources that you can access on your own after this presentation and continue learning more about accessible documents, accessible presentations, and just the whole process of designing with accessibility with these principles. And we've gone ahead and put that into the chat area as well, along with the slides. So here's my contact information. Luis Perez, again, at lperez@cast.org. And then you can follow me on Twitter at @IonAccess. All right, so are there any outstanding questions that I didn't get to? We'll take a couple of minutes. I know we've gone just a little bit over. Sorry about that. Not very good about keeping on time.
So Luis, I've been, in interest of time, I've been answering some of the questions. I know not everybody, people would prefer to hear from you. But I did, most of the questions were fairly straightforward. I think that's a credit to how thorough and clear you are as a presenter. But you know, I don't know if you have any specific resources for Google accessibility. There were some questions around, we know that Google Slides are really popular. Of course, Google has some resources, but do you have anything that you...
One thing, there is an application or service, it's called Grackle Docs. So Grackle Docs can be a way to perform a similar sort of accessibility check with a little bit of guidance. We'll see if we find that link for you. It's Grackle and then Docs. And it's available for the entire Google Suite. So you can use it in Docs, in Slides, and what's the other one? Sheets. I'm not a spreadsheets person, but you know, the one thing a lot of this you can do in, by the way, it's not specific to Microsoft Office or PowerPoint. These are concepts, right? They're best practices. So making hyperlinks descriptive, you can do that in any of the Google tools. So that's what I would say is it's not so much about the individual tool. I mean, I showed you some of the most popular ones today, but it's about the concepts.
Right. And I put in a link for Google Slide accessibility, which will help with where to click and where to find some of the features. Grackle is a great tool for doing some checking, which isn't built into Google like it is in PowerPoint.
Yep, absolutely.
There was also a question from Doug about text size recommendations. So the title versus the body of a slide. So
I would say, like, whenever I would be preparing a presentation, I would generally think about the last person, because I was in higher education. I always thought about the student who showed up late and who was in the back of the room. And in fact, in some cases, I went to the room where I would be presenting and I would go all the way to the back of the room. And if I couldn't see it from back there, then it was too small. But also APH, American Printing House for the Blind, they have some great resources that address that topic more specifically. And they also address the issue of color really nicely. So that's a great resource that you can look up, the American Printing House for the Blind. Generally, I try to avoid, my cutoff is usually around 28 to 30. I try not to go too far below that. Again, that's just from experience, but it really depends on your slides, right?
And I think it depends on the setting as well. If you know the setting that you're going to be in, so a lot of different factors. Some of it is common sense, and some of it is getting some awareness and information from some other sources, like APH.
Right. So the common sense is, imagine somebody shows up late and they're in the back of the room. Will they be able to see the content?
And I'm doing a quick look at APH. I think a lot of their recommendations are for print. So if you go to American Printing House for the Blind, I'm not seeing anything for digital right off the cuff here. So, but look for digital.
We can find that. We can add it to the handout. I know that they have a presentation on accessibility in presentations as well.
Great. And then color. Julie had a question about.
Oh,
that black contrast can be difficult for some readers. What are your thoughts about color contrast?
I missed some of what you said, but she was talking about color contrast. You know, white on black, black on white never fails.
Well, she did mention that she had some experience with people who have a difficult time with white on black.
Yeah, and also the setting too can play into that. So depending on where you're presenting, you know, there could be some issues. In fact, for some people, dark background with light text will be better. For a long time, that's what I use because I have low vision myself, and it actually helps me while I'm working on the slides. So thanks, Aim Center, for the white. No, you're okay. But it really depends on the setting too. So if you're in a really bright room, you know, I think the black background with the light text is going to work a little bit better.
Okay, I think that we addressed a lot of the questions, if not all of them. You know that you can always reach us at the AIM Center. I'll just go ahead and you can reach us, all of us, at aim@cas.org. If you have follow-up questions, of course, you know, a lot of you follow Luis on Twitter, so you can always ask him questions. I did get the sense that some people are interested in this presentation specifically for Google Slides, which we appreciate. So that maybe that's well taken, and that will go into our queue for technical assistance. So thank you for your recommendations.
And thanks everybody for sharing all your thoughts, questions, and tips. I see some tips still coming in about fonts. So that's, yeah, these are all things to consider. Some fonts may be more accessible than others. So thanks everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you to our captioner for staying over a little bit. Have a great afternoon.
All right, take care everybody.
Bye-bye.